A snowman. One must have a mind of winter, to regard the frost in the boughs of the pine trees crusted with snow, and have been cold a long time, to behold the junipers shagged with ice, the spruces rough in the distant glitter of the January sun, and not to think of any misery in the sound of the wind, in the sound of a few leaves, which is the sound of the land, full of the same wind that is blowing in the same bare place, for the listener who listens in the snow, and, nothing himself, beholds nothing that is not there, and nothing that is. Well, a little bit more Wallace Stevens for you. I try and record a poem 3-4 times a week. That was a short one. Very powerful, though. Very powerful. Poetry is the art form that I connected with the most as a young man, and even as I get back into it as an older man. It's always been able to alarm and arrest me, you know. Anyway, I'll start in my usual custom, which is to just talk about my day and then work into whatever the podcast is going to be. So I got up early this morning and I went down the mountain. And my friend was going to pick me up and we were going to drive to San Jose to get my documents at FedEx for my residency. And when I got to the base of the mountain, I noticed that there was smoke coming from the front tires, and from the front of the car, and we opened up the engine. There was nothing wrong with the radiator or anything. I took it to a mechanic, and it turns out that I don't know what that is in English. I think bomba is it's like a valve or something, but the brake fluid wasn't getting to the brakes. So I'm going to go to San Jose on Friday. But it just pisses me off a little bit because the last one to use the car was Steven. He drove around. He had the car out for 4 or 5 hours on like Sunday. And it would have been impossible not to notice this. As I was going down the mountain, I noticed that you had to push the brake pedal all the way down to the floor. He just doesn't give a shit, man. So now I gotta see, after I get the bomba fixed, I gotta see if I need new brake pads or anything like that. I didn't hear any metal or anything like that, but it's really quite something. Like, you couldn't touch the rim of the wheel on the front two tires, the front left and right. It was like touching a hot skillet. Anyway, so and I had to wait an hour or so to get a cab back up the mountain, which cost me $20, and you know, it just fucking drives me crazy, man. There's like a curse around this guy. Anytime he touches something of mine, something goes wrong, and I don't know what it is, man. I don't know what it is. I'm getting very superstitious about this. I suppose the solution is to just not loan my stuff anymore, but that's more difficult to do than you might think. Anyways, the house build is underway, and everything seems to be going okay so far. I'm trying to get a handle on my feelings lately. Or my feeling. Not my feelings, because I don't mean emotions here. Feeling and emotion are two different things, by the way. It's like, I think emotions are an egoic construct and almost useless. And been profoundly sabotaged and attacked in our society and denigrated and misrepresented and misaligned. Like almost everything else, we're coming to the end of a complete inversion here. And feeling it's not an emotion, but it's deeper than an emotion. I don't know how to describe it, which is rare for me because I can usually wrap language around almost anything. Feeling is like foreshadowing would be an example of what I mean. Right? So I'm getting a foreshadowing of something. I don't quite know what it is. Could have something to do with what's coming. I don't know. I don't know. But I do know that the powers that be are going to have to do something very dramatic to alter the course of events. And it's going to take a lot of forms. And it's going to be a very weird time to go through as I see it unfolding and as I feel it. You know, in the past, when we had conflict in the world, there was relative unity at home. When Canadians and Americans marched off in droves for World War I and World War II, we were a relatively unified people and a unified culture. You know, when you watch the movies, like even something as stupid as like Marvel's Captain America, the first one, before Steve Rogers takes the serum, and all he wants to do is get into the army. And there's a great shame in not getting in and getting rejected and getting the 4F stamp. You know, young men, they didn't know if they would be able to live with themselves if they didn't go to war, if they didn't do their part. I'm not saying war is good. I think every young man returning from World War I and World War II would have had a completely different understanding of what war is and realized that their youthful aspirations to sign up and do their duty were perhaps misguided, but that generation kept it to themselves quite a bit. Now, back in the early part of the 20th century, there really wasn't a whole lot of immigration. You know, the country you were in was the country you were in. Now, every wave of immigration in the United States and Canada caused controversy. Every one. In fact, I'll speak more about Canada, you know. One of the oldest beefs in Canada, and it went well into the 20th century, like beyond 2050. One of the oldest beefs in Canada was Catholic and Protestant. We carried over the old Irish stuff, the old Scottish stuff, the UK stuff, European. And it's amazing to think that enmity, that division, you know, it persisted for 500 years. You know, the King James Bible came out, I think, in 1511. I'm not going to look it up. I'm pretty sure it's 1511. Or they started working on it in 1511, and it took them, 10 or 20 years to do it. But 1511 is what I have in my head. I could Gemini it, but I can't be bothered. The details aren't so important. If I'm off 30 years in a 500-year cycle, it's fucking less than 10%. It doesn't matter. My general point remains the same. You always got to be on your toes, though. You know, you never know when some egghead is going to watch your podcast and go, oh, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, which is why I'm so careful to articulate what I'm talking about. The Catholic Protestant thing was huge. Huge. People do not understand how big an issue this was. Okay? I think it informs almost everything in the last 120 years or so. You like to watch those mob movies in the United States, you know? Who are the two white mobs? You know, before the Russians came on the scene, but that's a whole other story. The two white mobs were Irish and Italian. Perfectly documented by Martin Scorsese. He's done three or four Italian mob films, you know, Mean Streets, Goodfellas, Casino, and he just came out with The Irishman, which is like blending the Irish and the Italian thing together. And then he did a movie purely about the Irish mob in Boston, and that was The Departed, with Jack Nicholson and Matt Damon and Mark Wahlberg and Leonardo DiCaprio. Phenomenal cast. Phenomenal movie if you can tolerate that kind of stuff. My wife can't. She can't. She has nightmares if she watches a movie that has blood in it. But in real life, she's tough as nails. Like I never quite get this, why she can't watch the movies, right? But people are what they are. Now, what would you think if I told you that a lot of the basis for the moral authority of the white mobs, the Irish and the Catholic, in the United States was contempt for a Protestant establishment? That even aspects of the Italian mob can be compared to the IRA. Not many people talk about it that way, but once you zoom in on it, it's undeniable. Absolutely undeniable. When my mother was growing up in a small town, called Westmeath, Ontario, I document this in The Devil in Us. It was about a population of 300 people. It was largely a farming community. Yeah, it's a little bit famous now, not for the town, but because the section of the Ottawa River that goes by it is one of the top 5 whitewater rafting spots in the world. Now, in this town my mother grew up in, it was largely a Catholic town. So the parishes, so you know what a parish is? It's a community denoted by the church, or a sort of a canton or a municipality defined by the church, or the circumference of a diocese, which is a church. There's a whole order to Catholicism. There's a whole political structure to it. There's a circumference of influence for a church and a priest, and maybe the priest will have a monsignor as an assistant, which is like the equivalent of a deacon in the Catholic Church. And then all of these parishes will fall under the umbrella of a bishop. I'm not sure what they call the jurisdiction of a bishop. There's an excellent question for Gemini. I'm really taxing this AI, right? These are some pretty weird and off-the-wall questions. So let's just ask. In the Catholic system of geography and jurisdiction, a parish is a circumference of space governed by a priest and perhaps a monsignor, what then is the name of the circumference of space governed by a bishop? I'm not sure if there's going to be an answer to this. Oh yeah, the circumference of, oh my God. Yeah, they've got it all mapped out. There was a whole, because remember, this was the original sort of lay of the land. The Catholics laid it out, and it went by the churches. And this persisted for centuries, more than a millennia in Europe, if the history were given as valid. And again, to go over it again, I am going to firmly go on the record and state that I think Jason at Archaics Theory is incorrect. I believe that there is a 4-generation pivot, no doubt in my mind, but I don't think it invalidates the history we have. There's let's call it a persistent context that goes longer than whatever his cycle is. But it's hard for me to deny that we are not now in a 144-year cycle, 1880 to 2024, of radical change. And that cycle is now being cycled out. We're going to something else. So I see the merit of the cyclic nature of his observations, but I don't think his thesis has been nailed down. I think it's theoretical at best, but it's a theory that people should keep pulling on because there's something there. But it's not what he's saying it is. It's not a global reshaping of the world with mudslides and all kinds of shit like that every 138 years. It's, if you think about it long enough, it just won't make sense. Like flat Earth doesn't make sense. Now, do not put into my mouth that I'm saying the world is a basketball, that it's perfectly round. My vision, and I mean that literally, my internal vision of the world was the shape of a tortoise, which is maybe why the Ojibwa call it the turtle. They call the Earth Turtle Island, right? They call it Turtle Island. So neither flat or round are right in my expectation, but the general idea of orbit around a central force, like a nucleus or a sun, in the various phases of the fractal, smallest to the biggest. It goes bigger than solar system, but always got to throw those comments in for the fact fetishist watching the podcast. And I do believe that circular magnetism model is correct for reality. In fact, there's no doubt in my mind. And electromagnetism is the most deliberately underdeveloped and underspoken science in the world. It sort of ends with James Clerk Maxwell in the 1870s. And Maxwell was an absolutely brilliant Scottish physicist, and he believed that I forget how, it's like 3 phases. There were 3 phases of light. Oh, he believed that electricity, magnetism, and light were all the same thing in different forms. Something like that. Don't quote me. Again, there could be a physicist watching the Telemaker review. Welcome. It's a highly intuitive and poetic podcast. So don't hit me in the face with a fry pan because I miss a fact. I miscalculate a 500-year cycle by 30 years like the King James Bible. I really just don't give a shit. But here's the jurisdiction for the church, okay? So this is how the world used to be divided. And Canada being a Jesuit territory, because remember the French got in there before the English. Now the English eventually beat the French, but it was more of a stalemate than a victory. In military history, the final battle was the Plains of Abraham in Quebec City. And the English won and the French surrendered. But there's no such thing really as a French surrender. For those of you who've never lived with French, they don't really surrender. And that doesn't mean they keep fighting. It means they just keep hating you. they, they never really make peace, right? That's been my experience with the French, and I think every Anglo-Canadian would back me up on that, unless they're making their living in the federal civil service and they're not allowed to express an opinion like that in public. So the influence of the French and their Catholic system, because remember, France is a European country that never went to the Protestant system. There were Protestants in France. They were called Huguenots. But the Catholic systems, there were certain countries in Europe that never left the church. They never left the Catholic Church. And England and Germany led the Protestant charge. And both of those countries have profound and intricate relationships with the Jewish diaspora. I'm not saying anything. Just put that connection I've made on a shelf over here and don't forget it, because I'll bring it up later. So the circumference of space governed by a bishop in the Catholic system of geography and jurisdiction is called a diocese. A diocese, or an archdiocese, if it's a principal or historically significant see led by an archbishop, is composed of many parishes and is the principal unit of administration for the local church. The bishop, as its chief shepherd, has pastoral and juridical authority over the clergy and faithful within its boundary. So juridical, that's lawful authority. So you got the parish, which is the priest, sometimes assigned by a monsignor, and that is a stable community of the Christian faithful within a particular church whose pastoral care is entrusted to a parish priest as its proper pastor. A diocese and archdiocese, a bishop gets a diocese and an archbishop gets an archdiocese. And an ecclesiastical province is a metropolitan archbishop, a grounding of neighboring dioceses called suffragan sees, S-E-E-S, as in the Holy See, usually established for mutual assistance and common action. There you go. So back in the day, Canada, when my mom was growing up, she told us stories that if the local store ran out of milk, you could not go to the next town, which might be 10 kilometers away, 5 miles away. And they might go by bicycle, they might go by horse, or later on when the vehicles came in, they would go by a car or truck or something like that, right? But if the next town was Protestant and you were from the Catholic town, you wouldn't want to go there and get your milk. There was a high degree of possibility that you'd get roughed up. And these were all white Europeans. Let's be clear about that. Okay? We don't talk about this anymore because we've been so overwhelmed with differing forms of immigration that exacerbate or minimize the difference between Catholics and Protestants. But it's there. And it's always been there. And it's one of the reasons that the European Christian diaspora, and we can call ourselves, colonial Europeans if you live in Canada, the United States, Australia, or New Zealand. But really, it's a white Christian diaspora leaving the motherland of Europe, right? We were immigrants and we left. And that Catholic Protestant thing, it really held itself together. Now, as I said earlier in the podcast, a lot of the moral justification for the behaviors of um, Catholic mobs, like Irish mob or Italian mob, was the belief that they weren't going to get a fair shake in a Protestant society. You hear Tony say, "I'm rewatching The Sopranos again. I downloaded all 6 seasons." There's so many things you can do with Starlink, right? That's just fucking monster download, man. It was like 75 gigabytes. It's in high definition 1080 DPI, like Blu-ray quality. Goes really well with the new 27-inch monitors. But Tony alludes to this in his sessions with Dr. Melfi, for those of you who have seen the TV show. And I don't mean to alienate you if you haven't. I'll just quickly move beyond this point. But there's a number of sessions he has with Dr. Melfi where he references the Italians being looked down upon when they came to America in the early 20th century. And they regarded it as Wasptown, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. Now, culturally, I'm Catholic, and I'm a particular kind of Catholic, and that's a Celt. So, I am an indoctrinated Celt, because the Celts were originally Druids, which I would not characterize as paganism. It was far beyond paganism. But we got converted to Catholicism. You see this, another example of this is Mel Gibson, Scottish Catholic, right? Now, a lot of the Scots who left Scotland when the New World was forming were Catholics, and they came to Canada because there was a tremendous amount of persecution towards Catholics. And even in England, there was a tremendous amount of persecution, even murdering of Catholics. Right? So John Milton published Paradise Lost in 1666. And the political, if you don't know the poem, it's about Lucifer and his legion falling and becoming the demonic legion. And it deals mainly with Mammon, Moloch, and Belial. And we know Moloch to this day. Moloch is worshipped. Belial is commonplace. And Mammon is absolutely worshipped. Mammon is the love of matter and money. It's materialism, right? And that was very much a Catholic poem. And this was, remember, by this time, the Anglican Church had been formed. The Jews had been let back in to England, and they had already become quite prominent. And by the end of the 1600s, they had the franchise on the Bank of England, the Amsterdam Jews. And so you see this European relationship with the Abrahamic system and its history is absolutely fascinating. And we forget that it's still there. And because we're dealing now with things like obnoxious Somali twats like Ilhan Omar, right, who married her brother to get citizenship in the United States and just continually shits on the United States. Now, you would think that would be a unifying thing. But there's a deeper issue here than just religion, because just as the Catholics had their parish, diocese, archdiocese, and ecclesiastical province as the regions or territories under the governance of the Catholic Church, when the Catholic Church lost its foothold and dominance in a culture, like it did in Germany and like it did in England, there was a new formation. All right, so then you get towns, municipalities, and all of these sorts of things. Now, Louisiana and New Orleans is a very, very Catholic place as well. a bastion of Catholicism in the otherwise largely Protestant and evangelical. Now, these are the permutations of Christianity, okay? So we now look upon churches like the Baptists, the Presbyterians, and the Methodists as established Christian religions, even though they're not that old and they're a byproduct of Protestantism. But what that original protest never really stopped. The moment that the Vatican lost its central authority and Protestantism began to splinter, it kept splintering. And it's reached a point now where it's absolutely absurd, where you get these radical self-declared prophetic evangelicals that are completely fucking demonic, like Joel Osteen, like Kenneth Copeland. And you can look these guys up. I mean, Copeland, he just looks the demon, right? And this was I don't know if this was done deliberately, but it definitely ended up being an attack on the Christian faith. And it weakened us as a culture. And, one of the reasons I'm talking about this tonight is because there's a huge resurgence of this now. In many ways, Charlie Kirk represents the migratory pattern, just like Canadian geese will have a migratory pattern. In the fall, they'll start to fly south and they'll go all the way down to Florida. And then they'll come back up to Canada in the spring. But they can't winter in Canada, so they fly all the way down. If you've never seen it, it's one of the most beautiful things you can ever see is the ducks flying overhead in the V formation. And sometimes you can get up to 15 or 20 groupings of Vs, and each V might have 500 geese in it. This is like something you see in Canada. In the fall, you see the geese going south, and it's if you've never seen it, it's really beautiful. But it's a migratory pattern. Now, consciousness and culture has migratory patterns as well. And there are migratory patterns all through nature. One of my favorite to talk about is the migratory path of the salmon, who, by reasons unknown to biologists and, to my understanding, any other kind of science, nobody can explain how salmon get back to their spawning ground, or why they swim upstream for months to get back to where they were hatched, or how they remember where they were hatched, let alone how they get back there. It's mind-boggling. Because salmon go right out into the ocean, right? And then they have to go through these oceans and to get all the way back to the tributary they came out of and go back up the river all the way back to where they were hatched. If they can even get there, because the grizzlies are waiting for them and just feast on them as they're going up the shallow rivers against the current. Another fascinating migratory pattern is the monarch butterfly, which they all go down to Mexico in the winter. There's this one region of Mexico. And if you've ever seen the National Geographic photographs, it's unbelievable. There's like millions of monarch butterflies there. So I'm talking about migratory paths. Now, human beings have migratory paths as well, but they're not natural or instinctual, like the monarch butterfly, like the salmon. They're not like that, like the Canadian geese. Our migratory patterns are related to cultural ancestry. So we'll deviate for a while. Now, this is for people who don't break the boundary of culture. Culture is a consciousness boundary you break in spiritual practice. And to my sense, it's quite liberating to break it. Because once you break it, you can live in any culture. You can adapt to any culture because you understand the principle of culture. It's like becoming a master linguist that can learn a language in 3 months. You can go live anywhere and speak their language. And culture is the same thing. You can go anywhere and learn the culture of a people. It's quite fascinating, actually. Now, what Charlie Kirk represents is the entire migration of the Christian religious system. And especially because he's American. And in a sense, Candace Owens represents it as well. And even to a certain extent, the Englishman Russell Brand. And I imagine this would be even harder to do in England, publicly convert. I think Russell Brand converted to Catholicism. Yeah, Candace Owens did. Now, the thing about Charlie Kirk is he was being pushed toward the Catholic Church, and I'm not sure if that was his wife or not. She was Catholic. But Charlie began his religious career as an evangelical. But as the complexities of religion and scripture and history become more manifest, people are looking for more answers, and a lot of Christians associated with loosely structured Protestant expressions, which collectively live under the umbrella of evangelical. And evangelical just means that, now they're getting fairly organized as well. They're extremely well organized here in Costa Rica, the evangelicals. My wife's an evangelical. She considers the Catholic Church a cult. You know, even though her father was Catholic, her son's Catholic, I'm coming from a Catholic family, my wife, she'll just say right to your face, it's idolatry. That's what the pastors have taught her, that Catholicism is a form of idolatry. Now, that's the Jewish influence on the evangelicals, because the Jews have always wanted to destroy Christianity. And one of the ways Jews destroy things is through confusion and deception. It's actually the motto of the Mossad. I'm not being anti-Semitic here. War by deception. And if you haven't figured this out yet, Jews are in a perpetual state of war. When they say they're God's chosen people, what they really mean is they're God's appointed soldiers. That's what they mean. And they will wage war against anyone who misrepresents their interpretation of God. And they'll do this in a surreptitious and deceptive way. You'll never know you're getting stabbed or poisoned. You'll just fall over one day. That's the Jewish way. It's the Jesuit way as well. I put the Jesuit oath right in The Devil in Us, a memoir of you and me. And it's about killing the enemies of God and the enemies of the faith, and gets very graphic about how you kill them, flay them alive, but it's hard to believe it's coming out of the Catholic Church. Now, old Charlie Kirk, Charlie was probably going to convert to Catholicism. Now, are you starting to notice a pattern about all of these very big people who go to the Catholic Church? What happens? What happened with Candace? Hasn't happened with Russell Brand yet, but it will. But I'm not sure. He may have gotten some Protestant river baptism or something, like right out of a fucking Coen Brothers movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? No disrespect to the Protestants and the evangelicals. All Christians are worshiping the same thing. They're basically studying the Gospels and trying to purify their hearts and be living in the image of Christ, or the example of Christ, which I think is commendable, by the way. Okay? I don't think it's very spiritually rich, but I think I'd rather live in a community of people adhering to those principles than adhering to some kind of bohemian narcissism, which is really what the left is now. Which comes from Jacob Boehm, by the way, was one of the great pseudo-mystics of Protestantism. He was really just a Kabbalist, but they make him out to be a Protestant mystic. He was tutored by Kabbalists. Okay? I can I can smell out the Kabbalist. I can smell the Kabbalist influence now, the way a hound dog can find a downed pheasant. It's just so easy for me now after all the work and stuff I've done in the books. It's unbelievably easy. So, what happens to all these people who migrate back to the Catholic system, even if their Christian journey existed before they went back to the Catholic Church? The moment they hit that Catholic system, suddenly they reevaluate the Jewish influence in the world, don't they? So, what's causing that, do you think? Are they, because these people, the Catholic Church is always looking for champions. Every church is always looking for champions. Okay? Every church. Um, and so if you're a prominent figure, seen to be living a decent and moral life, and you've got 10 million people a week listening to you, and you publicly convert to Catholicism, you can bet your bottom dollar that you're going to have archbishops on the phone willing, which, so the system goes priest, bishop, archbishop, metropolitan bishop, and then cardinal. And then the College of Cardinals is the selection pool for the Pope. Okay? That's how the whole thing works. There's a movie out now called The Conclave. You can watch it and see all the sordid politics of Rome. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not taking any sides here. Okay? I think they're all fucked. I think what we're witnessing is the death of the Abrahamic system in the Western world, and it will end up killing Judaism, Catholicism, and most of the Protestant expressions. And it's got to happen. And the reason it has to happen is prophetic religions, like a cake in an oven, are delimited by time. If you don't bake the cake right, it doesn't rise or it collapses. Right? And these religions are cakes in the oven because they're all on timers, because the basis of the belief system is what the prophet said, and what the prophets have said is delimited by time. Now, there may, as the church got into this and wrote the latter books, I should withhold that comment because I'm not sure about it. Now, we really don't know what a prophet was, right? A prophet could have had profound astrological abilities, like astrology, right? There could have been all kinds of things that a prophet was doing that they just don't declare. But my point in saying these things is the ability to predict what's going to happen in time is, in my estimation, no evidence whatsoever of connection to the divine. None. Zero. And yet all of these religions pivot off of prophecy. Now, I've been over this before on the Talamanca Review, but never quite the way I'm doing it today. Today it's different. I'm going at it a different way today. So to answer my own rhetorical question that I asked a couple minutes ago, all of these public figures, like Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens, they end up questioning the Jewish thing. Because the Catholic Church is not influenced. You see, the Catholic Church predated the Jewish Renaissance. So the Jews were freed by the Renaissance. They still experienced pogroms, anti-Semitism, and ostracization in many Christian countries, both Eastern Europe and Western Europe. And I'm not minimizing their hardship. It's been a tough 2,000 years for these people we call the Jews, okay? It has. And I respect and admire them. I don't agree with their religion. I think that there's a lot of black magic and negativity in it. I think trying to rebase the world with animal sacrifices is the stupidest fucking thing I've ever heard. I think people should be exploring themselves and regarding their body as their temple rather than putting all their attention on the so-called third construction of a Temple of Solomon, which is basically fucking Hogwarts. It's pure magic, all that shit, right? The way they cut the stones, everything. This is the old architecture from the era of megalithic and magical structures, things like the pyramids. The temple is connected to that. But the Jewish temple is specifically constructed for amplifying the effects of blood magic and ritual magic. Okay? Any rabbi, if any of you know any rabbis, go and ask them. If you think I'm full of shit, go and ask your rabbi. Okay? Now, if he starts to and ah and sound like Gemini AI, explaining how the final solution was more important than winning the war for the Third Reich based on the rationing of energy, whether you fuel your tanks or keep the incinerators going to burn the Jews. If you start to get that and ah from your rabbi, he's full of shit. And most of them are. They're full of shit. Okay? No better than the Catholic priests or anybody. And they know some stuff. You can't not pray and study that material and not grow into a multidimensional consciousness. But there are flaws in this system, in these systems that produce delinquencies that are quite literally intolerable in the modern age. And they won't be tolerated in the age of Aquarius, which is why all this stuff is dying off. Right? So the world we're going into, I don't think will really tolerate religions anymore. And the West is more religious than spiritual. And even when we import spirituality, we kind of fuck it up because we're so material. Right? We don't have the same level of discipline as the Chinese and their mastery and perfection of Taoism, or the Indians and their perfection of the Vedic system, which leads right up to sainthood, by the way. Or even the Northern Indian system with Guru Nanak and the 10 Sikh masters and the Granth Sahib, the final book. And then the flowering of spiritual practice amongst the Sufis in the border between Pakistan and India up in Amritsar, where all the great, so many 18th century Sufi masters and 19th century Sufi masters emerged as full saints, fully God realized. Now the Jews mock this. They think sainthood is not something that they're even struggling to achieve. Right? Their whole thing is righteousness and holiness, but we don't know what they mean by holiness because they don't share their theology with the world. Very curious thing. And it came out in that interview that Candace did with Rabbi Barclay, right around the time Candace was breaking with PragerU and all the Jew nonsense. And they just went at her. And that Rabbi Barclay literally yelled at her, chastised her. And really, I don't think he realized how bad that looked. How dare you criticize Rabbi Shmuley? He's a holy man, Candace. Don't you know? He's a holy man. And I wouldn't expect you to understand that because you don't understand our theology. Which leads me to one of my more final and curious points, which is, why doesn't the world understand this theology? Why? Every religion and spiritual path in the world is open and shared, except for really diabolical secret societies, okay? And that's because power isn't shared. Love is shared, power is hoarded. There's a maxim you can live by, and you can use that as a filter in interpreting these religious teachings and the Jewish position on sharing religion. Power is hoarded, love is shared. So what we're listening to now, or what we're witnessing now, is the complete and total destruction of the entire Western religious system. Because there is no prophecy of destruction. Now, I can't believe how many people are getting this wrong. Even the guy on the other side of the mountain, Shunyamurti, the so-called enlightened teacher running his ashram there, straight through the Talamanca Mountains there. He's on the other side. I'm on the Caribbean side, and he's on the Pacific side. I'm on the Atlantic, he's on the Pacific side of Costa Rica. But if it was flat and there were no mountains, it would only take me about 50 minutes to drive where he is at 80 kilometers an hour. It's not that far. Through the mountains, it would probably take me 7 or 10 days to walk there. He's saying it's the end of the world too, but I don't believe it. I think it's all a bunch of bullshit. There's no end of the world. There's, in a sense, the world is ending if you define the world as culture and belief, which is one of the reasons there's no new ideas, because the new well of ideas we're going to be dropping our buckets into to pull up the water, that well isn't drilled yet. Or if it's drilled, it hasn't shifted into the area of the astral where we can access it by the giant clock system we live in that we call astrology. And so there's this absence of new ideas. I spoke about this last night. There's no new ideas. And really how absolutely simple it is to fix our systems. You just simply have to apply real law to the financial system and stop all this casino, derivative, gambling, lying bullshit and lock these fuckers up. That's what you got to do. And if not lock them up, seize all their assets and put them in the public treasury. I don't know why nobody's out there saying this, which is one of the reasons I don't put much stock in politics. Why is Trump the solution to transgender and the death of the death of conservative values through the excesses of liberalism now? Right? And liberalism is expressing on massive excesses now in its thinking and expression. Unstable excesses that can't sustain a society, which has nothing to do with which way you lean politically. But why is Donald Trump the solution? Why are private-public partnerships taken to the 10th power so you can barely tell the difference between their triple P bullshit and fascism? Why is that the solution? Why is it that nothing Donald Trump says really has anything to do with the core operating mechanism of our society and that which has been weaponized against us, which is the money? Why is it all this superficial stuff? Because he's not a solution, right? We're not ready for a solution yet. The solution won't come until we go through the brouhaha, and the brouhaha is going to be epic. Now, circling right back to the beginning of the podcast, I started out by saying in World War I and World War II, minus the Catholic Protestant thing and the various ethnic divisions amongst Americans like Ukrainians, Irish, Italians, and all those chauvinisms which are carried over from the old world. Now we could be heading into global conflict at a time when there's absolutely no stability at home. And people are on a daily or a weekly, if not daily basis, taking up arms and killing innocent people at ICE detention centers, and so on and so forth. And there's only one party that benefits from all of this, and that's the party in Israel. And as Vladimir Ilyich Lenin said, the Lenin of the Soviet Union, if you want to understand who did something, if something happens, like something blows up, your best course of action for determining who did it is to determine who benefits by it, which is why so many people are getting their underwear in a knot now about Israel and suggesting that Israel may have had Charlie Kirk killed. I would never suggest that. There's no evidence of that, and there never will be any evidence of that. But it cannot be denied that as Charlie Kirk migrated to Catholicism and began to turn on the Jews, they would tremendously benefit from his death. And the way his death is being equitized now to create a Christian Reich. And somebody told me that expression was first used by Jason at Archaics. And if that's the case, then so be it. It's a great expression. But I've come across it. I came to it sort of on my own. So but I call it a Reich because it's an unnaturally violent and egocentric and ethnocentric contraction of society, and it's in a lot of ways given up on unity, which is a prelude to civil war. So I ask you this: when's the last time the world was simultaneously in national conflicts like a world war or regional wars, and simultaneously in a civil war? I suppose you could make the case that the two things always go hand in hand because a lot of European powers helped the South and the North in the American Civil War. The French helped the North quite a bit. I'm going to call this podcast The Broken Abrahamic Mirror. I'm Bruce McDonald, and this has been the Talamanca Review.